This is 1865. Welcome to the Group of Death.
Hi, today returning to the Group of Death we have Jeremy, and making his debut appearance we have Adam. As we record this bit, we're 4 days and 12 games into the tournament. So Adam, what's been your highlight so far?
Oh, there's been a few, haven't there, to be fair. For me, I'm not a big cricket fan, so it doesn't affect me as much. So I can confidently sit here and say Australia beating Turkey was actually a highlight of mine. I thought it was great that they won that game. I think they played brilliantly.
They did, yeah. What about you, Jeremy? What have you enjoyed so far?
I've just enjoyed hearing the stories behind individual players because, the way modern football is these days, there's so much hype around the next thing. So until the Premier League was finished, we couldn't think about anything else. Until the Champions League was done, we couldn't really think about anything else. So there hasn't really been a chance to get into the interesting backstories behind some of the players, some of the lesser known nations taking part. Obviously, Curacao springs to mind. But looking at Cape Verde today, their star striker, or one of their star players anyways, is a League of Ireland pro that was recruited via LinkedIn, which is fantastic. So I've been working up my LinkedIn profile certainly this morning to highlight the 11 goals I scored in five-a-side last year, just in case any fringe nations are looking for any additional backup. But yeah, as with Adam, it's just the whole festival of football thing, which can feel like such a tonic compared to the sort of overly corporate and overly sterile environment of the club game, with the 24/7 nature of the coverage that we all live with these days. So yeah, just the chance to learn about something entirely different.
Fantastic, yeah. So what I wanted to talk about, and Curacao, so my highlights so far was probably when Curacao scored their goal. I actually jumped up out of my seat and went, yes, not because I hate Germany or anything, just because of who they are, and for them to actually score when it looked like maybe they were going to actually get completely done over. But that kind of relates to what I want to talk to, which is Germany obviously scored 7 in that game, although the goals were actually Julian Nagelsmann will be quite happy because the goals were spread around and it was only Kai Havertz getting 2 out of that. So far, we've got Balogun for the US has got 2, and Ayari last night, he got 2 as well. But it's kind of not that like Tunisia are necessarily a minnow or whatever, but it is a little bit that some of the big teams who are in a group with one of the really, really small teams, some of their star players are obviously going to get a much better shot at getting the golden boot than some of the other teams that are in maybe a more competitive group, seeing as you like the golden boot normally comes to like 5 or 6. So obviously it's brilliant seeing the likes of Curacao playing and the Cape Verde playing, but does it sort of give the a bit of an unfair advantage to the big teams?
Well, potentially, yes. I mean, the obvious touch point example is again from another American World Cup, and again a reference for the younger listeners maybe, but Oleg Salenko, who famously shared the Golden Boot with Stoichkov, USA '94, on the back of scoring 5 in a game against Cameroon, who weren't exactly a minnow nation at the time, but had just sort of hit the beach, metaphorically speaking, by that stage. It's interesting. For many years, 6 seemed to be the ceiling for the Golden Boot. Ronaldo was the only one that kind of broke through that in 2002, but it felt like from 82 onwards, I think nobody got more than 6 in a World Cup. So I'm quite looking forward to seeing how you've got to go all the way back to 1958 for the record, which was just Fontaine with 13. So it'll be interesting to see, if people can get close to or even break that. Because yeah, you're right. More, A, more games, B, more mismatches. It adds up to, or in theory, on paper, adds up to more goals for individual players. So yeah, it's an interesting point. Interesting to see how it pans out.
And Adam, so how do you see the Golden Boot working out? You have a much broader knowledge of players around the world than I do.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a slight benefit. It depends on obviously the way your group works. I think being a 48 team tournament as well, it's not just your group stages. Normally, you just be like, oh, you play like when Harry Kane won the Golden Boot 2018, and we played Panama, and he scored a few goals, and he kind of stacked his goals up against lesser nations, and that's how he won the Golden Boot, which we see quite a lot. But I think this time, because there's the three teams that go through, you're going to have the group stages, but you also might have a knockout round where you play a team that aren't fantastic because they finished third in their group and they've gone through. So it'll be interesting, and it'll be based on just how teams go through the whole tournament. I think your typical favourites are still going to be favourites. I think Harry Kane, Kylian Mbappe are still going to be like favourites to win it. Then you've got maybe Lamine Yamal if he hits form with Spain, because I think they'll go far. I would personally, so we, just a side anecdote, with our work sweepstakes that we organised, we did something where we did the Golden Boot winner will also, if you got that country, you'll get a payout. But the reason I did that is because you're going to get a country that randomly they'll have a player from that country just score a hat trick maybe in a game, being with a shot of winning the Golden Boot. So I definitely think there's an element of advantage if you're playing a Curacao, Panama, or Jordan, or Iraq or someone along those lines. You do have a slight advantage because you might stack up your goals. But luckily, it actually hasn't happened too much yet. And if Florian Balogun wins the Golden Boot, I don't think we'd ever hear of the end of it as best fans. So I would be actively rooting against that just for that reason. But it's interesting for sure.
Absolutely. The other thing that popped up, and this was last night when Japan were playing, and they had every Forest fan's favourite manager, Ange Postecoglou, talking about it, because obviously he's managed in the J League and he's managed Australia, so has played managed against Japan. He knows a fair bit about them, and he was saying, and this was news to me, he was saying that they have a 100-year plan to get good at football. There were two things that struck me there. One is a 100-year plan. Can you imagine someone in this country coming up with a 100-year plan and then expecting it to last more than 2 years or whatever? And then the other is that Ange actually said Japan say they're 20 years into this plan, and he would say based on their actual performances, he'd put them at about 60 years in. So firstly, like a 100-year plan, who comes up with something like that, Jeremy?
Yeah, well, I mean, they are famously the longest, or all the oldest people in the world. All the record breakers seem to come from Japan. So possibly, somebody there had the foresight to pencil one in and think I've been with a chance of being around to see it come to fruition if I go and live on one of these far-flung Japanese islands that all of these 117-year-olds seem to come from. But yeah, and I think it speaks to the fact that in certain cultures, people do have a much longer term horizon on things, and in the West we are, well, certainly in my lifetime in this country, we've been so conditioned by the media to thinking in such short-term cycles. I mean, it's a sort of getting into a larger conversation, isn't it here? But yeah, I think brilliant. I mean, we do, as was pointed out in our group chat earlier, we do have a tendency to overrun on the Grand Projet. And Rich pointed out that if we were to set in place a 100-year plan, HS2 would probably still not be finished, and goodness knows what it would cost by now. And we did, of course, experiment with 100 Years' War, and even that overran. Ended up lasting, I think, 117 years. Kicked off 1337, ended 1453. So people complain that standards of numeracy are dropping, but I think that suggests it's never been a national strong point. But yeah, I interestingly, to come back to last night, I noticed after Sweden scored their first goal, the commentator announced that it was 2,893 days since their previous goal, which turned out to have been only in Russia 2018. But if we are doing, calculating these things in days now rather than in years, I worked out that England's 60 years of hurt equates to 21,915 days of hurt, which sounds worse. And Japan's 100-year plan indeed works out at a 36,525 day plan. So yeah, good luck getting that on the wall chart.
When you put it in those terms, actually, yeah, England are basically running on a 60-year plan here. It's not actually that much different. So, Adam, one of the things I was impressed with was that after the game, the Japanese manager wanted to say thank you to Dutch football in general, because that has been their inspiration. It was a Dutch coach who's helped form the J League, and they obviously have this reputation for this kind of tidy science type play. Not just that, their fans also tidying up after the games. But yeah, there does seem to be they have seemed to have gone about it quite deliberately in how they're building their side up for these tournaments.
I think Japan are a fantastic team to watch. I think they play really good one-touch football. I think they're energetic. I think they play with a real tenacity about them, and they've got some really good players that I think you would not be surprised to see go to Europe's top 5 leagues. Like, you're looking at the goalkeeper Suzuki, who I think a lot of Premier League teams are really interested in. I thought he was fantastic against Holland, along with a lot of players. But I think Sano in midfield, I really like. Obviously, I know we're not talking about Forest today, but there's definitely a couple of names in the Japan team that I'd be interested for us. So yeah, I think a 100-year plan is quite out there. I'd probably need a 100-year plan to be half decent at football, in fairness. So I understand that. But look, I think the rise of football in Asia has become, in the last sort of 15, 20 years, and a lot of people say since the World Cup in 2002, there's been more of an interest in football over there. And I think it's not far-fetched to think that an Asian team wins the World Cup in my lifetime, certainly. And I think in Japan's plan, I kind of agree with what Andrew said. I don't think that they'd be year one. I think they are like year 50 or 60. I don't think they'll win the World Cup, but I do think that if they got to a quarter final, would it surprise me? Absolutely not. I think they're a good team. And I think they looked, in my opinion, better than Holland last night. So I think that should also say a lot about them as a team as well.
Absolutely. I thought, yeah, Holland really struggled against them at points, especially in the first half. They didn't really know how to get through them, which, as someone who likes defending, that made me very happy to see. So, one of the other features of this tournament then has been the series of rule changes. So we had in the first game, there was the thing about mistaken identity by VAR. There's the thing that the Forest bugbear from this season to some extent was corners and goal kicks being given when they were the wrong way around. And then there was the thing last night about the player touching the ball, the cricket slinko thing. Jeremy, tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it was Isak, wasn't it? For Sweden's 4th goal, I think it was. And yeah, it just it's one of those things that, I guess, because it was 4th goal in a 5-1 win or whatever, it's a curiosity rather than a major talking point. But if that had been, the winning goal in a semi-final or anything like, with a goal with a lot riding on it, you can imagine the fuss that would entail. Because it's not visible to the human eye. And personally, I know going back to Lampard's ghost goal in South Africa and all of that, there is obviously a great argument and a proven case for having technology in football. But for me, it just gets to, the stage where there's so many delays and so many technicalities, and obviously, the referees are rendered sort of obsolete by the amount of technological interference in their decisions, that it just leaves me feeling a little bit uncomfortable. Obviously, it was the right decision technically, but the fact that that there's a huge delay while it all gets sorted out, and B, the commentators are having to explain, in detail to the viewers what exactly is going on. Football's a simple game, or meant to be a simple game, and it does feel to me a little bit like we're getting too, like it's turning into sort of almost rugby union in terms of the complexity of the rules, and where does it all end? But anyway, that's just me shouting at clouds, being an old man.
So, I mean, it's when you say about the technology. So apparently, the thing this tournament that FIFA are doing is all the players, obviously, they already wear their little like GPS sports bra type things. But then there are all the cameras all around the pitch which track all the players, and FIFA have made all the players have their like digital avatar being recorded. So when it is an offside decision, the idea is they can use those sensors to figure out which player is where, and then they show the animated graphic of the player being on or offside. Adam, I'd just like to show you this, which I discovered the other night when I actually went to bed while the game was on, and if this will appear. So on the BBC website, they will take the feed from FIFA.
A little bit slower this 10 minutes, hasn't
and
it?
in real time, they will show you the game as those avatars. And so all the camera changes here are me actually scrolling about on my phone
Douglas Santos to
as the ball moves around.
Gabriel, now Fabinho. One old head replacing another with him replacing.
Stop that there. So it's an entirely different game, isn't it, Adam?
Certainly is. I think it's one of those usage things for me. That might have its place. And I think the place for that for me is analytically. Like if you're someone like myself that likes to look at all the analytics of the game, how they're playing, how they're setting up, looking at particular players and moving in certain situations, that's actually really helpful. You can do that. You can move it around. You can look and say, oh, they're playing a back four. The 6 and the 8 are in different positions. Like Vinicius Junior's tucking in because he's not getting a lot of the ball and he can come inside and you can see that. That's great. If I was doing like an analysis for a game, I'd probably use it. If it was just watching the game, I absolutely wouldn't, especially at a World Cup. At a World Cup, you want to see crowd. Do you know what I mean? You want to see the atmosphere of the situation, and watching it in like that, all you're getting is the pure, just AI football, if you like. So for me, it has a really good usage that I probably use for anything that I do when I write, for example. But in general, I think that that's going to go over most people's heads. I think about my dad looking at something like that, and I certainly think he would be one of the first people to say it's a load of rubbish, it's woke nonsense. So I think it has its use, but I don't think you use it very often.
No. And of course, the Switzerland game where Remo Freuler was offside, it actually failed at that point, just when it was actually needed. So the last thing I just wanted to discuss with you is, as we're recording this, England are sort of just preparing for the game against Croatia. Obviously, we have a vested interest in there with Elliot Anderson. At the moment, I've not heard anything about any subsequent bids coming in for him. I know Manchester City wanted to try and get it over the line before the game, but it's getting a bit close now. But Adam, I'd like to start with you. How do you think England are going to line up? What do you think Tommy Tactics is going to go for?
I don't think it'll be too dissimilar to what we've seen in previous tournaments. I think he probably will just play a 4-2-3-1. I think he'd probably just go fairly standard. Pickford in goal. I think you go O'Reilly at left back. I think he's had a fantastic season for City. I think he'll start Stones. I think if he's fit, he'll start Stones. I think it just goes from an England perspective. I think he might go Stones and Konza. I would probably go Stones and Gahey personally if Stones is fit. But again, it's completely subjective there. Um, I, I I can't say I agree with the squad that he took, but I think when people say that, they go, "Oh, X person from my team isn't in it," and that's why I don't like it. It's not because Morgan Gibbs White's not in it. It's just that there's lots of reasons why I think it's not a cohesive unit for a World Cup. But I think it goes Reece James at right back if he's fit, and then you'll go Anderson and Rice, Hens, Bellingham. I think that three is just that's completely locked in for the whole tournament. I don't think that changes. And then you probably go Kane, Rashford, and Saka, I would imagine. Rashford did really well at Barcelona this season. I have no issue with that. And then you've got a half decent bench in that. You're playing Croatia, who I think when people hear Croatia, they're thinking, "Oh, it'll be a really tough game." It's a good Croatia team. It's not the best Croatia team. When we played them in 2018, they had some of the best players in the world in their prime, like Luka Modric. Mandzukic certainly wasn't one of the best players in the world, but he was the player that causes problems and obviously caused England problems on that day as well. So I think that it's not the best Croatia team in the world. I think it's a game that I still expect England to win, but it's a test. It's a test. It's probably more than some of the teams have had so far, like your Germany's, for example. But it's a test that I think we come out of, and I do think we win fairly comfortably. I would say 2-0 England.
Yeah. I would say, yeah, probably from my point of view, the biggest difference to say previous tournaments is I think the way we're setting up is designed to have Kane dropping deep, and then he can ping one of those like long balls forward for someone like Rashford to run onto or Saka to run onto. It's kind of built that way, whereas before it was almost like accidental that Kane would drop deep, and it was almost like we didn't realise he was going to do that, and so it was always a bit of a surprise for us. Jeremy, how about you? How are you feeling about England against Croatia?
Well, I'm pleased that it's a 9 p.m. start. For one thing, I'm gonna stick my neck out and say I think they'll pick Kane. Beyond that, I don't know. I love Declan Rice as a player, and I remember watching him in England's first game against Slovakia. Was it in the last Euros? I thought he was brilliant, and then he just seemed to retreat into himself a little bit. So I'm hoping that having Anderson in there with him will free him up a little bit. I do worry about people running beyond Kane because I do think there is that, when he drops deep, he does tend to get in people's way. So as long as Bellingham or Rodgers or whoever it is prepared to do that, and I think Rodgers is famously good at that. So as long as Bellingham understands that how to get the best out of Kane, I'm with Adam. I don't think Croatia are what they were, certainly in terms of individuals. Whether so much of it comes down to team spirit, doesn't it, in these big tournaments? And so I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. I think I also am a big fan of Reece James, so I hope that he starts. I think Pickford has been over the past few tournaments consistently outstanding, and one of the few players that really seems to play better at international level than for his club, particularly with his distribution. So, I'm feeling pretty confident with the proviso that it's hot. And think back to Germany 2006. I mean, there was so much wrong with that from an England perspective. But the spectacle of Beckham throwing up at the side of the pitch in the Ecuador game because it was so hot. And I think the hydration breaks is another. Speaking of rule changes, one that's been causing controversy, and I guess this thing about them not being needed in the stadiums with aircon and roofs and that kind of thing. But you've got to have one standard rule for everyone, I guess, or maybe it gets too complicated even in these technologically enabled times. So yes, I'm quietly confident about how England are going to fare, but it's England, so you never know, do you? I mean, if they can win their first game, it'll make such a difference. I think 2018 was the first time they'd won an opening match at a World Cup in my lifetime, or certainly in my memory. And funnily enough, in 2000, to wind the clock back a bit further, 2002, I got married the day before England played Sweden in their opener in Korea, Japan, and it was morning after the wedding. The instant that Sol Campbell's header hit the back of the net, my wife walked out of the bathroom in her new outfit and said, "How do I look?" And I set the bar quite high for reactions at that point. I've never quite managed to live up to it. So maybe this time, you never know. I'll have to go and try on some new clothes while England are playing, and hopefully they can score a few goals. I
just wanted to say as well, tomorrow England are playing in the Dallas Stadium, which is where the Netherlands played yesterday. I just wanted to say that stadium looks absolutely incredible. Like all the stadiums so far have looked amazing, but it is one of those with a roof that closes and then it's air conditioned. So apparently it was like 20 degrees inside, which is quite a feat of engineering, I have to say, and hopefully that can play to our advantage as well. But I'd like to leave it there. So thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you very much, Adam. Lovely to have you back again.